Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Kiana Canada Show. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and your shares, what it does is it pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that videos like this are important. But we must be reminded that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, that does not mean that videos like this are not important. So today's topic is going to be about totalitarianism and whether or not the countries in the global north are moving toward totalitarianism. Now, I did prepare for this video a little bit, and so there are some references that I am going to make from some notes that I collected and that I kind of researched. I didn't do a lot of research. I just did enough to carry on with this topic. So I'm going to try and link things together, the different issues that we'll be talking about. So it's just going to be like my a concatenation of putting different topics together to make the argument that certain states within the global north are moving toward totalitarianism. Now, referencing an Italian idealist philosopher, Giovanni Gentile, he stated that when describing a totalitarian state, everything for the state, nothing against the state, nothing outside of the state. And so when we reflect on that, what is happening within the United States of America and what's happening within Northern Ireland, for example, we can see that everything for the state. And we see that within the Trump administration, right? So everything is about the Trump administration, it being in control of every facet of society. There is no individualism outside of the regime. Citizens can't individuate. Nothing against the state. We see this as well, right? So, for example, in the United States, if you comment and you are in opposition with your rhetoric of the Republican Party, conservatives in the United States of America, then there's going to be some pushback. Not only will there be pushback, but there's likely going to be reprisals and consequences. And it is similar to some degree here in Northern Ireland, where if you are speaking out against particular issues, you can be punished as well. So again, it raises the question for me as to whether or not these democracies are moving toward totalitarianism. And the third, nothing outside the state. Now, I think that this is given broad interpretation, right? Nothing outside of the state. So what does that mean? So if there's nothing outside of the state, then I think for me, it raises the question as to nothing can come in, right? So if you're not like the state, if you don't hold the dominant ideology as the state, then likely you're not going to be able to come into the state. Now, some people may argue, well, Kiana, there's a reason for that. That is to protect the state from threats to national security. And I understand that argument. Like, I sympathize with that position. But not everything is a threat to national security, right? And more recently within the United States, we have seen an unleashing of domestic extremist events within the United States of America. And individual podcasters, independent media has raised a number of theories as to why this is happening. I've also raised a couple of theories as well. Like, I believe that sometimes when the state is attempting to take away justice, not answering your grievances, not only doing that, right, but isolating you, this is a way in which the state facilitates abuse. And for some people, they don't recognize that they are being used in this way by the state. For example, there's a large body of research that demonstrates that the state will now, because we're in the age of technology, what often happens is that people are glued to their devices and they're spending more time on their devices than they are spending with normal citizens. And so we're not interacting the way that we used to, like in the 80s, where we didn't have smartphones, right? So during that time, of course, I think that there's an argument that could be made is that people socialized more because there wasn't like this big development of technology. But now people are socializing a lot less and spending a lot more time and a significant more time on their devices. And so this allows the state to control, in a sense, what you are looking at and how you are perceiving that content. It's what I call diametric content saturation, and this is where sometimes the state will flood your social media pages with content that is inapposite to the content that you usually would review. And most people won't know this, but sometimes like you're getting a number of advertisements, or you're getting your feed is being bombarded with violent content, or sometimes the content has to do with hate speech. And I need to remind you that this is not a video that is promoting or inciting hate speech, or nor is it advocating for violence. This is just an educational and informational videos so that you can make up your own mind about the developments that are happening around you. So going back to the diametric content saturation is where states will often bombard your feed with content that is inapposite to like what you would normally watch and review. And this is a way to prime and to make it, I would say, to make it easier for you to be indoctrinated with certain pieces of content to shape your opinions and your beliefs about what you're seeing. And so when I look at these events that are taking place across the United States, I can't help but to wonder as to whether that is happening to some of the persons that are acting out violently. Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, there is evidence to suggest that some people do have these feelings of prejudice and feelings of hatred within their hearts. And so they're acting out, they're legitimately acting out on those feelings. But I don't think that this is in all cases. I don't think that in all cases that what we're seeing coming across our social media feeds when we're looking at these incidents that are taking place. I don't think that this is all of them, right? Indeed. So there is also an argument where the state is attempting to move us toward a totalitarian regime that they will seek to politicize every aspect of social existence. So everything for the state is politicized. So if a citizen says that they like something, or that they're going a particular place, or I guess that's a bad example. Let's say for example, a group of people are meeting and they're meeting in a room. So they gather together, they assemble together, and they want to talk about their experiences with persecution, right? And it's really not a conversation about politics. It's really about shared experience and healing, so to speak, right? This is something that I can come up with. Well, sometimes the state will seek to I think in instances like that the state will seek to make that meeting or that assembly something more than what it really is. So, for example, the state can say, oh, well, they're meeting together because they are planning to go against the government. And that is the politicization of every aspect of social existence. Another example is when I was at Queen's University Belfast, and I sought to hold an information session on political repression. And although this did although it did concern, ladies and gentlemen, politics about understanding and identifying the signs of people who are being repressed, it was more about bystander intervention and less about the politicization of every aspect of social existence. Although, in a sense, I guess it's convoluted, so to speak, that people who are being repressed politically, their social existence is politicized. And this moves us to the abolition of the private. So when we're moving toward totalitarianism, states will abolish the right to privacy. Everything that's private. They're abolishing what you seek, the private life that you seek, right? So this is where the surveillance state comes in. The peering into the window of our inboxes, our email inboxes, peering into the window of our mailboxes, peering into the windows of our homes. It's a kind of voyeuristic surveillance that, in my personal opinion, is quite as obsessive that the government engages in. I want to go back to nothing against the state. Now, we've seen this with, I think it was Stephen Miller, I think that's his name, his speech when he spoke at the ceremony of Kirk, and there was a lot of rhetoric that he was saying in his speech. In a sense, I want to say that if we can dissect that speech from Miller's speech, we can see like where everything for the state, nothing against the state, and nothing outside the state fits into that, right? So Stephen Miller's fanfaronade speech, I think, in my personal opinion, embodies this Giovanni Gentile's description of totalitarianism. And so let's move on. Let's go to state control, right? So what is state control? Well, it's the influence of the state. Essentially, it's where the state, through its influences, it penetrates every aspect of human existence. That is economy, education, culture, family life, and so forth. And so when we think about totalitarianism, in my personal opinion, it is strongly tied to transnational repression. As we know, it is not just the global south that is partaking or perpetrating transnational repression. The global north states are also engaged in this practice, but they don't call it transnational repression. And again, I mentioned that in another video. They don't call it transnational repression because they can't bring themselves to take responsibility. Oops. Sorry for that. They can't bring themselves to take responsibility for their actions and to, I guess, you can't take responsibility for your actions, and two, you cannot accept that what you're doing is similar to what you're saying your adversaries are engaging in. And so totalitarian states are characterized by a pervasive system of ideological manipulation and a comprehensive process of surveillance and terroristic policing. Now let's break that down. Are characterized by a pervasive system of ideological manipulation. Well, we see this in a number of states in the global north. And before I continue to move forward with this discussion, when I talk about the global north, that is not because I am a talking head for Russia, nor am I a talking head for China. I'm not a talking head for these states. I am a citizen of the global north, and I'm recognizing that when I look at the definition of totalitarianism, I see this within states in the global north. So characterized by a pervasive system of ideological manipulation. Well, we see this in the United States, where there is this Christian conservative way of living, and that anything outside of that is considered, in the conservatives' view, as wrong. Here in Northern Ireland, it's quite similar to some extent. It's the opposite. There is ideological manipulation when it comes to Catholic Republicans, and so there's a large group of Catholic Republicans that are gathering together in masse with this one ideology. And if you have any opinions outside of the dominant ideology, you become an inconnu. Not only do you become an inconnu, but you become a pariah in the community. You're stigmatized, you're isolated. And I think that is unfortunate, isn't it? Not like it. When I think about it and I reflect on it clearly, I'm like, you should be able to have your opinions and have a discussion about these opinions in a respectful platform in the marketplace of ideas, right? There should be a marketplace of ideas instead of just one idea that is shelved. And I write about that in one of my papers, that when I was in Queen's University, I expounded on that, where there is just one ideology on the shelf in the marketplace that citizens can purchase, and that makes us all one person, right? And That sort of reminds me of the allegory of the cave, and it's Plato's The Allegory of the Cave. And if you're not familiar with Plato's The Allegory of the Cave, it went something like this. So there's multiple people that are in a cave, and they've been chained in a cave for years. And so people who are running this cave, they are so they're chained in a cave, but they're sitting before like a fire. And the people that are running or controlling these persons in the cave, these enslaved persons, uh, they are putting, how can I say, they are marching objects across the wall. And so and I think it's like behind a curtain or something, it's weird. So they could be behind the persons that are enslaved, and all the enslaved persons see is shadows of these objects that are moving in front of them. And so they come to understand that this is a way of life and that this is real to them, right? And so one of the enslaved persons, they escape, and they see sunshine for the first time. They see their reflection in the pond. They see wildlife or birds, squirrels, things running across their path. And they realize that what they've seen in the cave was just a fabrication of reality. And so, excited about what they've discovered, that person runs back into the cave to tell the others, but the others are so indoctrinated by these objects that are moving in front of them and what they've been conditioned to learn, that they ignored this person who has actually been released from the cave, don't pay attention to their revelations, and ignore this person altogether. And I see a lot of this happening in society today when a person is, I guess, and again, I don't mean to be like illative about this discussion. I mean, I'm not trying to make an inference about any particular state, but what I've discovered is that sometimes when a person has new ideas or when they've discovered the truth about something, sometimes the masses will suppress that truth because they're so comfortable with the untruth, which is, I think, disappointing. Now, let's look at the process. We already understand what surveillance is. So we're seeing the states move further into surveilling American citizens. Even here in Northern Ireland, there is an increase in surveillance on particular bodies. Not every body is surveilled, but I think what's different about surveillance in like Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland versus surveillance in the United States is the surveillance within the United States is an attempt to persecute you, rather, where the surveillance in Northern Ireland, while it is a form of persecution, the goal is to make you doubt your reality about being surveilled. So if you complain that you are under the impression that you're being surveilled, there is, again, like Plato's cave, there are a number of people in Massé that will come against you and try and make you doubt your reality about that. And that is a form of totalitarianism because under a regime of totalitarianism, the state is in control, and the state controls the masses. The state controls the dominant ideology. And so any person that goes against the status quo is stigmatized and ostracized. Now, going further into state control, as we mentioned, there's terroristic policing. But what exactly is that? Because you may say, well, Kiana, in the United States or even in Northern Ireland, we don't see police that are killing people in masse, right? Or killing a number of people at one time. But from what I read, I think that terroristic policing may be described as state patronage, which is characterized by the use of state security personnel in an overt policy, ladies and gentlemen, of state political violence. So state patrons, what they often do is that they typically rationalize policies of repression by arguing that they are necessary to maintain law and order during times of national crisis. And we've seen this, right, haven't we, within the United States, where the National Guard in several military functions are being called to the streets of predominantly democratic cities and states. And I think that this is a form of state patronage, which in essence is terroristic policing, because it's used to bring fear to the public. It's used to create a sense of dread and trepidation and intimidation to the masses. Now, I haven't been in many countries where there is militarization of the state apparatus. The United States is, I think, famous for that. There is a little bit of that here in Northern Ireland. I haven't seen that at all in Sweden. Interestingly, in Sweden, like you rarely ever saw law enforcement. So if you're in Stockholm or Västerås or Örebro, or if you were in Västmanland, there was not, I don't think, a lot of. I don't think that I rarely saw law enforcement on the streets of those cities. I think law enforcement was really controlled to the city of Malmö, but not those other cities. And I never been to Malmö. I never visited Malmö, but I did hear that Malmö had some really good universities there. When I was in Spain, I didn't see law enforcement parading around the streets there. When I was in Canada, I rarely ever seen law enforcement parading around the streets. I don't know if it's different now, but the only, like here in Northern Ireland, there's law enforcement everywhere, all the time, everywhere, all the time. And I don't know if that's just because Northern Ireland is such a small city, Belfast is such a small city, but it's police everywhere all the time. It feels like a police state in a sense, and I don't know if that's the intention or the goal, or whether or not this is influence coming from the United States, because I know that Northern Ireland, they have adopted a lot of their policies to imitate the U.S. Policy, domestic policy. So I'm not really sure if that's why there's a lot of police here. That's a question that I should ask. Like, why is there a concentration of law enforcement here in Belfast? And like, is this concentration in other cities as well? Like, is it in Londonderry? Uh, but again, in a number of other states that I named, such as Canada, Sweden, Spain, I didn't see an increase or a strong police presence in those states at all. So remember about state control, I mentioned ideological manipulation. So what totalitarian regimes do is that they propagate an official ideology. So we're going back to this and ruthlessly suppress all rival creeds, doctrines, and beliefs. And I do see that a bit in the United States and, of course, in Northern Ireland. So in the United States, there is this Christian, conservative, evangelical belief system. And if you depart from that, there's an impression that you are not good, which is, to reiterate, I think that's quite unfortunate. Here in Northern Ireland, there is the same official ideology where if you don't fit within, like if your ideology is not 100% fitting within a particular group. Okay, so I didn't say that quite eloquently. What is a better way of saying how I want to say this? So there's an official ideology, what I discovered in my personal opinion. If anyone disagrees with me, I'm open to having a discussion about it. But I have come to understand that there is an official ideology here in Northern Ireland. And if you question that ideology or what you're seeing or what you're experiencing, you fall outside of that even further. So again, it comes back to the being ostracized and isolated, being stigmatized because you're not going along with the status quo. And the status quo, ladies and gentlemen, could very well be a socialist one. I'm a socialist. In a number of my videos, you can hear me say that I'm a socialist. But then there is a far left ideology here in Northern Ireland, just as there is a far right ideology that if you don't modulate your beliefs into these two separate ideologies, you can be ousted. And I think that that's quite unfortunate because it is a sign of totalitarianism. Another sign of totalitarianism, ladies and gentlemen, is a move toward reclaiming the past. Now, we have seen this in the United States, where the United States is I believe personally, is attempting to reclaim the past by rolling back protections for marginalized groups. And we know that that's how it first starts out, right? Once you roll back protections. So, for example, I think that there is an hierarchy of protection. And so once you start out at the top and you're able to roll back that protection, then everything else unravels, right? So it's like the weakest link. So sometimes the weakest link does not have to be the link at the bottom. It could be one of the links that's at the top. And once you unlink those protections at the top, all those other protections are in jeopardy. And I think that's what's happening right now in the United States is there's an attempt to unlink these protections so that marginalized groups aren't able to fight for themselves, and the court systems are unable to fight for themselves through protest, assembly, aren't able to advocate for themselves through organizations, etc. Indeed, there is strong evidence that suggests that totalitarian regimes, what they do is they embrace the idea about backward-looking change. And that's what we see in the United States of America, is it not? Like, we hear a lot of politicians, especially Republicans, state that we need to make America the way that it used to be. And when is a question that people often ask, is when was America great or good? And they often, and I guess the inference that's being made, or it's an innuendo that one can I guess interpret it right as an innuendo, is that they are referencing the past where certain groups did not have rights, where there was a system of oppression. Certain people were subjected to this oppression and weren't able to fight for themselves, weren't able to speak up for themselves, weren't able to protect themselves. But this should not be taken as, well, Kiana, like, are you a Democrat? I'm an independent, and although I feel like I'm not conservative, I'm not Republican, but I feel like if there is going to be change in the United States, ladies and gentlemen, it is going to come through, it has to come through the Democratic Party. Now, in a few videos back, you heard me state clearly that now is the perfect time for there to be a third party, because this duopoly is, in my personal opinion, ruining America. And I'm keeping a close watch on the politics in the United States, but I'm not seeing anyone talk about creating a new system or a new political organization. I'm not hearing that or seeing that online. And I think the closest that I've seen or heard about that is, I think, on Sabrina Salvati's channel, where she speaks about the 11 demands. Her and I think Eric T. They talk about the 11 demands, and I think that this is like a new system that could buttress a new political party. But I'm not seeing anybody else talk about that. Now, the Democratic Party is not, in the United States, is not, we're not letting them off as well, because how we distinguish backward-looking change from forward-looking change and progressive reforms is that forward-looking change and progressive reforms, what it does is it marches into the future, marches into the unknown, despite insecurity and uncertainty that it could involve. And the Democratic Party has never really done that. I think most of us would agree with that. Nor has the Republican Party. In the video that I have just recently uploaded, I talk about some progressive reforms such as universal health care, raising the minimum wage from $18 to from possibly $18 to $20 an hour in the United States, safety nets for homeless people, where there is giving homeless people, houseless people, a place to stay for. So there's a program that would allow them to stay within this program for approximately a year to save up money to find a job or to educate themselves so that they can lift themselves up out of homelessness. I also talk about reparations for descendants of slaves. And then I talk about revisiting the Second Amendment by possibly making amendments to it or repealing it, etc. And this is all to protect the right to life, right? But if we're to be honest, we haven't seen the Democratic Party, nor have we seen the Republican Party really strongly consider these policy reforms. Have we? No, we haven't. So the Democratic Party has failed to march into the unknown future, despite the insecurity and uncertainty that it could involve. And I think that if it at least tried to do that, then it would see Americans a lot happier in the state. But what we're seeing is not anything of that sort, right? We're seeing more policing, more militarization on the streets of the United States. We're seeing ousting of particular groups. We're seeing uplifting of one dominant ideology, and that can never bring about real change. And essentially, if the United States has never been on the list of the most happiest countries. Now, I don't agree with these lists. I think that certain states pay to be on that list, to say that their country is the most happiest. I don't think that this is real in a sense, but I think for a country to be legitimately happy, its citizens have to be happy as well. It just can't be those at the top. Now, what else is a reflection of totalitarianism? Well, state-regulated press. And this is where the state controls all information reported to the media. And I see some of that here within Northern Ireland. Of course, that's there within the United States, where, like, if there is a story that is not regulated by the press, it's not regulated by the state, or the state is not pushing those stories out, then there could be repression, right? I've seen that in the Republic of Ireland as well. Like when I reported on direct provision and I reported on morality policing within the Republic of Ireland, I was made to go through a troubling period of transnational repression. And my reasoning for that is that it's a state-regulated press. If the state says, okay, you can report on this, and you can report on this issue in this way. You can report on politics in this particular way. And what I've learned, especially in Northern Ireland, and of course in the Republic of Ireland, as well as the United States, is that in the United States, there is, to reiterate, a duopoly. So there is conservative media versus democratic media or progressive media. Progressive media is more so independent media, but democratic media or liberal media is like CNN, ABC News, NBC News. So this state-regulated press is more so, ladies and gentlemen, it's within Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So if you report on something independently, you can get a lot of pushback for that. Because there are, I guess the way that I would explain it is that there is media. So like, for example, in the Republic of Ireland, you have liberal media such as the Dublin Inquirer, and then you have conservative media such as gripe. And then you have, like, I guess, centrist media such as Irish Times, Irish Examiner. But if you report on something that is not controlled by the government, that the government does not approve, then you can run into repression. And last but not least, we're going to be talking about, which often ruffles a lot of feathers, but it is important to talk about this because totalitarianism is connected to this, and or white supremacy is connected to totalitarianism. And what do I mean by white supremacy? So, ladies and gentlemen, when I talk about white supremacy, I'm not talking about a white person. I'm not saying that white supremacy is an identity. So I'm not saying white supremacy is a white American. I'm not saying that white supremacy is an Irish person. White supremacy is a belief that there are biological differences between different human groups, resulting in different levels of humanity, with fair-skinned people holding superior positions. Now you may say, well, Kiana, in Europe, of course, there are going to be fair-skinned people, white people holding superior positions because they dominate the land. And that's not what I'm talking about. White supremacy is the argument that only fair-skinned people can hold a superior position. Not that they have inherited those superior positions by way of being born on the land or having a claim to land. White supremacy is saying that no, we're not going to allow any other groups to hold a superior position. And so we have totalitarianism that is connected to white supremacy, and white supremacy is connected to institutional racism. And this is what I was trying to explain to my allies when I confronted them the other day. So when I confronted my allies, ladies and gentlemen, what I was trying to explain to them is that institutional racism is really about how institutions are controlling the masses, right? But to be clear, so for example, I'll give you a definition of institutional racism, and then we'll go into like what that really means. So the Scarman report defined institutional discrimination and racism as a collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behaviors which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and racial stereotyping, which disadvantages ethnic minority people. Now, my experience with, or my understanding of institutional racism is where you have institutions to back up a particular feeling to say that those feelings are okay. So, for example, in order to practice racism, you need prejudice plus power. And this often involves institutions, right? And so, for example, in my particular situation, where I don't have to use my particular situation, but let's say, for example, a person wants to I'm trying to think of like a really good one. Okay, let's say, for example, a person has been fired from their job. And we don't even have to say that they've been fired from their job, but let's say, for example, that a person is trying to get employed, but there are structures in place that are saying that if you have a name that reads or sounds, has a specific format, or it sounds like too ethnic, then institutions will say, okay, well, we're not going to hire this person. A company is saying, okay, we're not going to hire this person because of the way that their name sounds. And I think that there was a study done where they actually removed the name and put like a more, white sounding name on a CV, and that person got the job. The same, like their credentials were the same, their educational experience was the same, everything was the same. They just swapped the name. And I think that that is, in essence, a form of institutional racism. Another form of institutional racism is where police will, and this is tied to totalitarianism, is a nod where police are involved. So let's say, for instance, a person is just driving home on the streets, and then they're racially profiled. A police officer pulls them over, and because of their status in society, they're unable to contest a traffic violation, or in the most extreme cases where there is an extrajudicial execution. Oftentimes what will happen is when a person is executed during a traffic stop, sometimes the state will come in and they will protect the officer that executed that citizen, despite the fact that the officer was wrong. And that is a form of institutional racism. It's essentially where institutions really have a hand in upholding a system of white supremacy and a system of oppression against marginalized communities. Now, we are going to talk about this in greater detail in another video, but I just wanted to kind of scratch the surface of this. This video is actually going on long enough, and I know that some of what I said, especially for some people who haven't been discriminated against or hasn't experienced institutional racism, I think it's ineffable, right? Ineffable for them to really understand, like, really the feeling of being put through such a practice. But of course, if you're a minority, such as myself, like I've been put through it, I understand it greatly and understand it. I have a relationship with it, unfortunately. And so, again, like I said, this video is really going on long enough, and I'm going to try and upload this to YouTube. But I hope that this was like informative. And what do you think? Do you think that we are moving toward a totalitarian state? What, in your opinion, constitutes totalitarianism? And are you seeing this play out in your own city or state? Is there hallmarks of this where you are and where you live? Is the question. And if you disagree with me about why these states that I've mentioned are not moving toward totalitarianism, why is that? And it's something that I would like to know. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. I apologize that this wasn't really it wasn't really streamlined the way that I really wanted it to be. It didn't flow as how I wanted it to be, but I am just conscious of time and just trying to compact a lot of information into a short period of time. And hopefully I can like unpack this in another video. And there you have it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe again. You can follow me on Facebook. You can just Google my name, Kiana Canada. Follow me on Facebook. And follow me here. And We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.